The first snow of that year came the week after Thanksgiving, the kind that looks like a secret whispered across the streetlights, slow and private. Gabriel watched it through the bus window with the hushed intensity of a scientist, forehead pressed to the cool glass, counting the flakes that landed and smudged. He liked numbers for their rules. He liked patterns for their promises. He did not like the way the bus lurched when the driver tapped the brakes, or the way the aisle became a narrow hallway of elbows and knees and laughter that climbed over other people's boundaries like ivy. Gabriel was 11 and in 6th grade, small for his age and careful with his words. He'd been diagnosed with autism when he was 4. His mother, Alicia, still kept the first evaluation in a folder in the hallway cabinet, next to warranties and birth certificates, proof and history all bundled together. At home, the labels softened. He was simply Gabe, the kid who lined up his toy cars by the color spectrum and read atlases for comfort. In the world beyond the front door, labels sharpened. On the bus, in hallways, on playgrounds, words could land like a snowflake or like a stone. That morning, the chatter on the bus rose and fell like a tide. Someone behind him beat a rhythm on the vinyl seat with their fists. Ahead, 2 7th graders were trading stories about a video game. Words sprinted from their mouths and tripped over each other. Gabe folded his hands the way his speech therapist had taught him, palms together, thumbs pressing, when his heart wanted to run. He counted the blue hats. He counted the times the driver checked the rear view. He counted to hold steady. At school, middle school sounds were bigger than elementary school sounds had ever been. Lockers slammed like doors in a storm. Sneakers squeaked in bands. The bell was a jagged thing. In English, the teacher asked students to pair up and share 3 unusual facts about themselves. Gabe had facts. The deepest lake in America was Crater Lake. The coldest temperature recorded in the lower 48 was -79. There were 350 billion galaxies in the observable universe, give or take. But telling a fact wasn't the same as telling a truth about yourself, and he had learned painfully that people preferred one to the other. He ended up alone at first, clutching his facts like coins he couldn't spend. That's when Maya slid her desk closer to his with a soft scrape. "I can't think of 3, she said, smiling like a light turning on. "So maybe you can lend me one," he blinked. "I have many," he said seriously. "Perfect," she said. "I'll rent 2. She didn't giggle when he told her about Crater Lake. She didn't roll her eyes when he clarified that estimates about galaxy numbers were revised as telescopes improved. "So," she said, "what's one unusual thing about you, not the world?" He looked at the way her pencil made galaxies out of doodled dots in the margins. He said, "I like to sit in the corner of the cafeteria by the window because the light is less like a shout there." He watched her to see if that was the wrong kind of unusual. Then, Maya said, "Sit by the window with me today. I don't like food that shouts." It was a small arrangement, a shift as subtle as the bus easing into a new lane, but it altered the day's geometry. Later, when Gabe misread a joke and offered a correction, and 2 boys responded with laughter that wasn't kind, Maya kept right on listening. She didn't make a speech. She didn't glare anyone into virtue. She simply made it less lonely to be exactly who he was. Bullying, at first, came in fractions. A shoulder bump in the hall that wasn't the accidental kind, a whisper that rose when he walked past and fell when he stopped, a pencil that rolled off his desk that didn't return. He tried to solve it the way he solved math problems. If A, then B. If B, then C. If you speak too precisely, then people think you're correcting them. If they think you're correcting them, then they want to correct you back. Not with facts, but with power. But the equation never balanced, because meanness isn't math and cruelty isn't a proof. Gym class wasn't about facts at all. In dodgeball, the rules were simple and everything else was chaos. He hated the whistle, the blur of red rubber, the way bodies became moving targets. On a Tuesday, he made the mistake of flinching with his whole body, and someone noticed. "Look," a boy named Trent said, grinning like a cartoon villain had taught him how to grin. "Gabe's got a force field." The next throw came faster. It hit him on the thigh and burned. The gym teacher barked something about sportsmanship, and the game rolled on. By the time the final whistle blew, Gabe's legs buzzed with the same numbness as his face sometimes did when he chewed peppermint. In the locker room, Trent swiped a quick hand through Gabe's neatly arranged clothes, as if disorder were a dare. "Oops," he said. "Butterfingers." Gabe's breath narrowed to a straw. The therapist had taught him to say, "Stop." But stop is a door, and doors are only useful if people agree to walk back through them. When his mouth did open, the word came out small, as if spoken by someone else several rooms away. Trent laughed and left. The floor hummed. The fluorescent lights buzzed in committee. Gabe reassembled his clothes, and when he could again, counted the lockers in groups of 4 to slow his heart's drum. The school called home that week. Not about the bump, or the thrown ball, or the scattered clothes, but about a missing assignment. The phone rang in the kitchen while Alicia was stirring chili. She listened and pressed her palm to her forehead like she was steadying a glass there. After she hung up, she wiped her hands and found Gabe on the couch, his backpack still zipped and sitting between his knees like a shield. "The missing assignment isn't the news," she said gently. "It's a headline. I need the story." He gave it to her in pieces. The bus, the laughs, the dodgeball, the locker. He told it mostly without adjectives, because adjectives felt like accusations. It took time to make the shape of the thing. She didn't say, "They didn't mean it." She didn't say, "You have to toughen up." She didn't say anything that turned the problem into something about the thickness of his skin instead of the sharpness of their edges. She sat beside him with her hip touching his hip and said, "We will not leave you alone in this." At the next meeting with the school counselor, whose office smelled like an orange had been peeled there that morning, Alicia didn't bring just the evaluation folder. She brought her voice, practiced and clear. "My son has a right," she said, "to learn without being hurt. His differences aren't misbehaviors. His strengths are real. His needs are not negotiable. So we need a plan." The counselor nodded, then the social worker nodded, and the nodding made hope feel like a chair that might hold. They added accommodations to Gabe's IEP, a seat by the window in classes that allowed it, a pass to step out when noise stacked too high, a peer buddy option for lunch. It wasn't armor, it was infrastructure. That Friday, on the bus ride home, Trent slid into the seat behind Gabe and flicked the back of his ear. It was a small flick, the size of a coin, but pain is not proportional to gesture. "Hey, force field," Trent said. "Does it work today?" Gabe looked at the snow that had outlasted the day, thin white lines across the lawns like stitches. The old equation rattled toward the same unfinished edge, but before he could decide whether to say stop in a bigger voice or to say nothing and shrink, Maya turned in the seat across the aisle and, without theatrics, said, "Trent, quit it." She didn't plead and she didn't scold. She named it and reached for the string that unravels a joke when nobody laughs. Trent smirked. "I was playing." "Okay," she said. "Play with someone who asked you to." He didn't. The bus thunked over a pothole, and the conversation broke like a cheap pencil. Trent sat back. It was not victory. It was not safety forever. It was a pause. And in a life where sound often arrived as a flood, pauses were gifts. That night at home, when the street grew quiet, Gabriel went to his room and turned off the overhead light. He sat on the floor beside the bed and watched the glow-in-the-dark stars he'd stuck to the ceiling when he was 9. In the faint, patient light, he thought about force fields and about windows. He thought about equations in which other people's choices were variables he couldn't always solve for. And he thought about Maya's voice, how it had been steady without being loud, sure without being sharp. Maybe, he thought, courage sounded like that. He didn't say any of it out loud. He just breathed in counts of 4 and breathed out in counts of 6 until the numbers steadied and the world, for a minute, fit. By March, the snow had receded into dirty mounds along the curb, like old promises that hadn't melted all the way. Gabriel had learned the geography of safe hallways and quiet corners. He timed his arrival to homeroom with the precision of a train schedule. He wasn't thriving every day, not yet, but he was surviving more days than he wasn't, which counts. On weekends, the neighborhood kids biked the dead-end street where drought-tired grass broke into chalky dirt near the edges. Gabe sometimes joined them, his helmet bright and a little too big, his cadence steady. It went okay until someone decided that the fun thing would be to race. Racing wasn't the problem. Noise was the problem and the rule scrambling of it all. When he pedaled too near the mailbox row and needed a second to reset his balance, a boy named Eli scraped past him and hissed, "Move. Robot," the way some boys will test how far a word can travel if no adult grabs it by the collar. They weren't friends. Eli wasn't a villain either, which is how real life differs from the movies. The antagonist is also just a kid who's afraid of being the slowest, the last chosen, the one without a laugh. But he was cruel that afternoon, and the cruel sentence didn't have to be a paragraph to do damage. Gabe braked hard. The bike wobbled. He didn't fall, not physically. He just unclipped from the afternoon, went quiet, walked his bicycle home, and set it gently in the garage as if it were the one that might be hurt. Inside, the living room was hushed except for Alicia humming with the radio while she folded laundry. She saw his face, the absence of it, and knew. "Tell me the sentence," she said. It was 2 words, he said. "I don't want to say them." "Then don't," she said. "Tell me how it landed." He pointed to the center of his chest. "Here," he said, like a small, hot thing that doesn't burn your skin, but burns the place that decides where your eyes look. She didn't rush to the door to confront Eli's parents. She didn't post to the neighborhood Facebook page. She did what she had learned to do. She normalized the weirdness of being human. "That place that decides where your eyes look," she said, touching his sternum with 2 fingers, "is allowed to take a day off. Do you want cocoa? When I am wounded, cocoa helps." They made cocoa and drank it like a medicine that didn't pretend to be anything else. When Carlos Gabe's dad came home that evening smelling like sawdust and winter air, he listened too. "I was called names at that age," he said simply. "I still remember them. I don't remember the Pythagorean theorem from 6th grade. I do remember the way a boy's mouth twisted around my name like it was a joke he could own." "What did you do?" Gabe asked. Carlos smiled without humor. "I turned into a comedian," he said. "It worked until it didn't. Then I had to learn something better." The better thing, as it turned out, wasn't a trick but a slow practice. That spring, with the help of the counselor, the family started a social communication group at school. 6 kids, 2 professionals, 1 rule: assume good intentions, correct real harms. They practiced reading faces as if they were maps. They practiced saying, "I need a minute," and "no thanks," and that joke didn't land. They practiced repairing, "I'm sorry, I won't do that again." It sounds clinical, but in the room it felt like sunlight inching across a carpet. After a month, the kids in the group began to nod when each other spoke. After 2, Maya's friends started sitting by the window too, not as a rescue mission, but because the light was kinder there. The story shifted microscopically, like a train switching tracks 1 notch at a time. Not everything improved. In gym, Trent kept being Trent, a boy who understood attention like a currency and had learned he could buy it with someone else's comfort. One Monday, while the teacher was busy refereeing another game, Trent balled up Gabe's hoodie and tossed it into the far corner of the locker room. "Fetch," he said. Gabriel walked over and picked it up. He did not fetch. He didn't look at Trent, because sometimes eye contact is consenting to a contract you don't want. When he turned back, Trent was there, close enough that the breath between them felt crowded. "Hey, force field," Trent whispered, voice coated with sugar. "What happens if I push hard enough?" A door opened then, literally the gym teacher returning, and the moment ended. But it didn't leave. In the afternoon, Gabe's body still remembered the nearness of Trent, the calculation he'd had to do. Speak or avoid, risk escalation, or let this one pass. Avoidance is a strategy. It is not a character flaw. But avoidance alone is a small boat on a big sea. 2 days later, the counselor invited Trent to a mediation. He showed up, sullen, late, smirking. He did not confess, but he did stop for a while after that. Maybe it was the presence of 2 adults. Maybe it was boring to bully someone who didn't give him the movie scene he wanted. Maybe Maya's steady "quit it" had begun to rearrange the ecosystem in small, unseen ways. You rarely know exactly when a culture shifts. You just notice the days you go home bruised are fewer. Spring break brought a different kind of learning. Gabriel's parents enrolled him in a maker's camp at the library, where kids built small robots with toothbrush heads and taught circuits to behave. When he walked into that fluorescent bright room the first morning, he braced for noise. It was noisy, but it was a good busy. the kind that comes from concentration instead of spectacle. A boy with hair like a question mark said, "Do you like soldering?" His name was Rowan. He knew the color code for resistors by heart. "I don't know yet," Gabe said honestly. Rowan grinned. Good answer. He showed Gabe how to tin a tip, how to not rush heat, how to wait for the solder to flow like a decision finally made. The sensory life of it was all wrong and all right at once. Acrid smell, bright points of light, the soft thrill of making a thing that moved. He left that week with a jittery little robot that spun in loose clockwise circles, and a feeling he wouldn't have recognized when winter began. Something like belonging, but made of table scraps and mutual nerdiness and discovery. One afternoon, on the sidewalk outside the library, Rowan asked, "So what school do you go to?" Gabe told him. "Oh," Rowan said, "I used to go there before we moved. Watch out for Trent." "I know," Gabe said. "He's not clever," Rowan said. "He's just loud." It was the kindest reframe anyone had offered. Loud is not the same as strong. Volume does not equal truth. The equation updated in Gabe's head, and for the first time the variables felt solvable. When school started again after break, he kept going to the window seats. He kept his pass for quiet moments. He kept showing up. The year edged toward June, and he passed English and he passed science, and in math he did more than pass. He soared. On the last day, the teacher handed back the final exam and said, "You don't just get it, Gabe. You see it." He tried on the sentence in his mind like a new jacket. It fit, but success was not a straight staircase. On a humid afternoon after school, the neighborhood kids gathered at the drainage ditch that became a trickle of a creek when the rain came. Someone dared someone to leap from one concrete lip to the other. Gabe calculated the distance, and with exactness said, "It's unsafe given the Moss coefficient." They laughed. Eli rolled his eyes. "Here goes the robot again," he said. Maya wasn't there that day. There was no counselor. There was only the itchy flicker of embarrassment, and the hot bloom of anger, and the familiar retreat. He walked home, again, and again placed his bicycle gently where it wouldn't get bruised. He stood in the kitchen with the light slanting across the countertop and didn't speak until the oven dinged, as if the sound made space for words. "I don't want to be a robot," he said to the empty room. It wasn't that he thought robot was a bad word. It was that he refused to be reduced to a joke. When Alicia came in, he found he could say the whole sentence out loud. She listened and then asked, "What would you like to be instead in their minds?" He thought. "A person who gets to exist," he said, surprising himself. "That," she said softly, "is non-negotiable. 2 years from now, you'll look back at this and say, I existed the whole time. And if we do our jobs, more people will see it too." He wanted that. He wanted the future to bless the past with confidence. He wanted summer to come and carry middle school away for a minute. The first day of summer vacation, Alicia made pancakes in the shape of states. It occupied the part of Gabe's brain that liked boundaries and dips, the way Florida turned out lopsided and Texas always looked a little offended. Between bites, they made a plan, not a rigid calendar, but a rhythm. Mornings for reading and math games. Early afternoons for speech sessions and social skills practice. Late afternoons for whatever felt gentle, sprinklers or Legos or the library's blessed hush. Evenings for family, for a movie with the captions on, for practicing conversations that might happen tomorrow. "Will this make me normal?" Gabe asked once, not because he wanted to fold himself into a blandness, but because normal is a door some rooms insist you walk through before they open. "Normal is a town nobody actually lives in," Carlos said. "We're not moving there. We're making you comfortable in your own house. And the house is your brain." The work was steady and sometimes invisible. The speech therapist, Ms. King, met Gabe in a room with a fish tank that burbled at a soothing frequency. She didn't try to bleach his words into something unrecognizable. She helped him build scaffolding around them. "When you're unsure what to say, try one of these 3, she offered. "Tell me more." "Can I think about that?" "I'm not sure." "What do you think?" "Scripts, but humane ones. Little bridges to get him from one bank to the other." They practiced reading sarcasm, not as the native tongue of adolescence, but as a dialect he could understand without always having to speak it. They practiced asking for a pause. They even practiced interrupting, kindly, intentionally, because silence can be as hard as speech when you want to point a conversation toward the truth. It was not magic. The progress chart moved like a cautious animal, stepping forward, stepping back, sniffing the air. In July, Alicia found a teen volunteer gig at the animal shelter that accepted kids as long as they followed routines. Clean bowls, fill bowls, wipe down the kitten room, sit on the floor and let the shy ones climb into your lap. Cats don't do small talk, Ms. King said with a smile. They do presence. Good practice. Gabe learned to speak softly to the skittish ones, how to let the shyest tabby sniff his sleeve before deciding he was safe. He learned that his own body could be felt as safe by someone else, which might be the first architecture of confidence. Maya visited once a week. She biked over with her hair escaping its ponytail and stories spilling out of her backpack. They played board games that asked for bluffing, which felt like a social marathon, so they made up house rules. You could declare a truth timeout and set your cards down and talk about why lying felt like swimming underwater too long. They painted rocks and left them on the elementary school walkway with messages that weren't preachy, just precise. You get to try again, one said. You don't owe anyone your silence, said another. Once, as they sat on the curb with popsicles, Maya asked, do you think people are mostly trying to be good or mostly trying to be safe? He thought of Trent. He thought of Eli. He thought of himself. His careful routes through hallways, his small retreats. Safe, he said finally. But not because they're cowards. Because the world is noisy and sometimes goodness requires you to stand in the middle of the noise and say words out loud, and that's hard. She nodded. So maybe, she said, we practice that too. They practiced small, brave things. Asking a question at the library desk when they didn't know something. Returning an undercooked grilled cheese at the diner, politely, telling a friend that comment wasn't kind, even when the friend might shrug and say, relax. The practice wasn't glamorous. There were no swelling strings. But at the end of August, when Alicia pulled last year's evaluation out of the folder and compared it to notes from Ms. King and the counselor, the change was more than incremental. It was a shape. Your sentences are longer, Alicia said, not just in words, but in the space they make around you. They are more bendy, Gabe agreed, smiling, and she startled at the poetry of it. Bendy sentences, what a miracle, to have a child who could measure his own growth in shapes. Of course the world doesn't stop testing you when you start to grow. One evening at the neighborhood block party, under strings of white lights and the hum of electric bug zappers, somebody's older cousin decided to be funny at a 13-year-old's expense. He did impressions, not of politicians or celebrities, but of kids on the block, cruel as a mirror in bad lighting. When he got to Gabe, he stiffened his shoulders and thinned his voice, and made a face that was supposed to be caricature, but was really just contempt drawn big. Carlos, who had learned and relearned the hard lessons about when to speak and when to stay, walked over. Hey, he said, not loud, not a threat. Not him, the cousin rolled his eyes. Relax, man. It's a joke. Carlos shook his head. My son is not the ground you practice walking on. Find a different place to step. There was a beat. People chewed. Someone laughed and then stopped. The cousin wandered off toward the beer cooler, and the conversation turned. But something had shifted. Gabe didn't just learn his father would speak. He learned the sentence he could grow into someday. Not him, not me, not anyone here. By September, he was 12 and starting 7th grade. He was still sensitive to the bell. He still preferred the desk by the window. But the classroom didn't feel like a trap anymore. It felt like a place with exits that weren't just doors. He joined the robotics club. He joined the math team. In English, when they read a memoir by a woman who mapped her childhood by the houses she'd lived in, he wrote about rooms instead. The fish tank office. The kitchen where Coco undid a cruel word. The shelter kitten room where shyness could climb into your lap and feel, for a minute, unafraid. 7th grade rolled forward with the clumsy grace of middle school. School dances where nobody danced. Science labs that smelled like vinegar. Group projects where one kid did everything and another brought snacks and called it a contribution. Trent didn't disappear. He just reappeared less often. Eli's jokes got lazier. The climate changed because enough people had learned to be weather for each other. The counselor tried something new that winter, a peer ally program. Instead of just pairing students who needed support with students who already knew how to give it, she invited kids like Trent, kids who sought power, to practice a different kind. She called it Spotlight to Lighthouse. It was corny. It also worked more than anyone expected. Being seen for what you can protect is a better high than being seen for what you can wreck. Maya joined the training as a matter of course. She was not interested in being the savior of the cafeteria. She was interested in everybody getting to eat. She and Gabe, still orbiting the window seats, spent their lunches naming what they noticed. How one teacher's sarcasm shut a shy girl down for an hour. How a compliment about a backpack could open a conversation like a door. They weren't anthropologists so much as gardeners, tending microclimates. January brought snow, and with it the cruelties cold can bring to old boilers and bus schedules. One morning, the bus broke down 2 blocks from school. Students groaned. Someone started a chant for no school. No school. The driver radioed for help. The air inside fogged with a collective exhale. Gabe felt the panic first in his fingers. The rules were broken. Schedules, arrival times, the entire machinery of predictability. He took out his index cards, the ones Ms. King had helped him make, laminated, discreet. He read the one titled, When Plans Change. It said, Your body may feel like it's on fire. Your mind is not on fire. Take 5 slow breaths. Ask a concrete question. He breathed. Then he raised his hand, not to the driver but to the air, and asked the seat in front of him, What will happen next? Maya answered because she knew he wasn't asking her exactly. He was asking the world to be specific. Another bus will come, she said, and we will be late, and everything will be fine. It wasn't prophecy. It was a sentence that widened the path in his mind. Another bus did come. They were late. Everything was fine. The world didn't owe them neatness, but sometimes it delivered. Spring crept in again. On a Sunday afternoon, the robotics team went to the regional competition, a fluorescent carnival of gears and goals and kids who spoke in the excited past tense about things they would build tomorrow. Gabe had found something that made him greedy for effort. He liked explaining the logic of the robot's turns to the judges. He liked the way adults leaned in when a child spoke a language they respected. At one table, a boy from another school asked him how he'd avoided wheel slippage on the ramp. Gabe started to answer with math that tasted like dessert. Halfway through, he noticed the boy's eyes glazing with overwhelm. 2 years ago, Gabe would have doubled down on detail, trying harder to be right. This time he did what Ms. King had called surface leveling. He paused, found a simpler sentence and said, We slowed it down. The boy's attention returned, like a person resurfacing for air. On the bus ride home, trophy in their laps, he felt a thing he sometimes distrusted. Pride. Not the kind that made your chest puff. The kind that made your shoulders drop, your breath deepen, your brain say, Yes, this is mine. In the window's faint reflection, he saw a boy who was still himself, still sensitive to bells and bumpings, still precise and literal and bright. And also a boy who could meet people halfway across a bridge that didn't collapse underfoot. There were setbacks. In April, a substitute gym teacher let dodgeball make a comeback. Trent, who had been behaving like a student who had learned something, reverted for a day. The ball thudded. Later, in the locker room, he tried a joke, and it wasn't one. So Forcefield, he murmured, nostalgia dripping. Still got it? Gabe stood very still, which used to be his hide. Then he surprised himself. He said without malice, I don't do that today. I'm going to get my things and leave. And he did. He stepped into the hallway and leaned against the cool cinder block and felt his heart coming in for a landing. He had not conquered anyone. He had not been conquered. He had chosen after school, he told the counselor. There was a conversation. Trent looked tired when it was over, like someone who had finally noticed the weight he was carrying to be this particular version of himself. He didn't apologize with a grand speech. But for the rest of the year, the old script lost its lines. And then, one bright May day, something ordinary and holy happened. Gabe got invited to a birthday party he wanted to attend. Not out of pity. Not because a parent had insisted. Because Rowan, now at a different school but still his friend, had a garage full of tools and parents who weren't afraid of teenagers with soldering irons. They ate cake without awkwardness. They built a small, ridiculous project, a doorbell that, instead of ringing, lit a strip of LEDs and spoke in a computer voice, "Welcome, human." It was a joke that didn't chew anybody up. It was a joke that included. On the walk home from that party, Maya kicked a pebble down the sidewalk and said, "You know, when I graduate..." She was a grade ahead. "You'll be okay in 8th. He believed her. Not because she had been the only reason he'd survived, but because she had taught him to collect reasons: family, teachers, tools, scripts, practice, cats, robots, a changing school climate, the stubbornness of his own brain, which wanted badly to connect even when it clanged. By the fall of 8th grade, warmth arrived later and left sooner, and the trees on Maple Avenue, Gabe still refused to count them because counting them felt like jinxing, flared and cooled, until the street looked like a slow campfire. He was 13 now, nearly 14. If 6th grade Gabe had walked beside him to school, he would have recognized the walk, the corner roots, the preference for the right side of the hallway. But he might have been surprised at the way the older boy's face softened when someone said his name, at the way he turned his body toward people he cared about, like they were warm lamps. Communication, everyone had promised, was a skill you could practice like piano. It was also a relationship. He and words were closer friends now. He didn't always speak quickly. He didn't always look at people's eyes. But he knew when to slow down a story and when to let it gallop, when to ask questions he didn't need the answer to, but the person needed to be asked, when to say, "I hear you," and mean it. The miracle was not that he had become someone else. The miracle was that he had become more himself, and the world had made some room. One afternoon in October, a new 6th grader sat across from him at the window seats. Her name was Sienna. Her mouth made tight lines when the bell rang. Gabe recognized the posture of a person trying to hold 100 pieces together. After lunch, he found her in the library, sitting in the corner nearest the plant with the leaves like green oars. "Hey," he said, stopping an appropriate number of feet away. "If you want the window seat, it's okay to claim it." She looked up, startled. "I don't want to be weird," she said. "You already are," he said gently, and she flinched, and then he added, "Everyone is. There's just a waiting period before people admit it. The window seat is grandfathered in." She blinked. Then she laughed a small, surprised laugh, the kind that sounded like permission. Later, he showed her the laminated card that said, "When plans change." "You can make your own," he said. "You can borrow mine until then." On a different day, he saw Trent in the hallway holding a stack of books for a kid on crutches. He looked awkward, like kindness itched where his old jokes used to scratch. Their eyes met. Trent's mouth quirked into something that wasn't a smirk. Gabe nodded. It wasn't friendship. It was something less dramatic and more necessary. A truce with the universe. Signed without ceremony. The social communication group had, by then, become a small tradition. Ms. King still kept her office at the fish tank frequency. The counselor's door still had a sticker that said, "You belong in this room." The school had a poster now. Not a platitude, but a diagram of specific ways to repair harm. Name it. Own it. Ask what's needed. Do that thing. Gabe learned to teach the younger ones without turning into a lecturer. "We don't fix each other," he said to a 6th grader named Omar. "We make it easier for each other to be fixed by time." Robotics season came, and with it the kind of late nights that make a cafeteria feel like a church. They won regionals and lost at state. The losing hurt, and then it hurt less. On the bus home, someone started to sing along badly and then better, and Gabe found his way into the chorus. Not loud, not led, but present. He did a small brave thing, then another, and when his breath got tight, he pulled out an index card and remembered, "Ask a concrete question." He turned to Rowan and asked, "Do you think LEDs feel proud when they light up?" Rowan looked at him in that sideways way that friends do and said, "Obviously." The final test of the 2-year journey didn't arrive with a moral trombone. It came as a small moment in a bigger one. In May, the 8th graders were asked to share a short talk with the 6th graders about how to middle school. Gabe wanted to say no. He said yes. He practiced at home until the cats looked bored. He worked with Ms. King on 3 points and 1 story. On the day, he stood on the stage in the multi-purpose room under lights that made time feel artificial. His hands shook. He placed them on the podium like you set a glass down so it won't tip. He took one breath to cross a small bridge inside his chest. "My name is Gabriel," he said, and the room quieted in that warm, waiting way. In 6th grade, I thought middle school was a machine designed to eat me. A small laugh, kind, not cruel. I'm autistic. That's not a secret, and it's not a punchline. It's a fact about how my brain organizes the world. In 6th grade, I didn't have many bridges for crossing from my world to other people's. Now I have more. He told the story about the bus breakdown and the index card. He told the story about the window seat and how if someone wanted it, they could sit there because it didn't belong to one person. It belonged to whoever needed light that didn't shout that day. He did not tell the dodgeball story. He didn't need to. He said, if someone hurts you, it's not because your skin is too thin. It's because their edges are too sharp. Get help. It's not weak to ask. He said, if you hurt someone, it's not because you're a monster. It's because your edges need sanding. Repair it. He looked to the back of the room and saw Trent leaning against the wall, arms folded, face soft in a way that would have startled the 6th grade version of both of them. Afterward, a 6th grader with a lanyard of keys-like armor came up to him and said, "Does it get better?" Gabe surprised himself by not answering with statistics about adolescent brain development. "It gets different," he said, "but you get better at being you while it happens." At home that night, after pasta and a movie with captions and a cat that refused to get off his lap, Alicia pulled a letter from the hallway cabinet. It was the old evaluation, the first one, edges worn from years of moving house to house. "Do you want to read this?" she asked. "No," he said. "But I want you to tell me one sentence." She scanned it, smiling wryly at the antiquated phrasing, then read, "Prognosis guarded for peer relationships without significant intervention." She folded it again. "We intervened. We existed," he said. "We did both," she said. "And you did the hardest part. You kept showing up." He went to his room and looked at the glow-in-the-dark stars, brighter now after 2 minutes under the lamp. He thought of younger him sitting in the dark, counting to find calm. He thought of the boy on the bus with the force field joke, and the version of that boy who now held books for someone else. He thought of Maya's first "quit it," and the 1,000 small echoes of it that had changed the climate of a school. He lay down and breathed in 4s and out in 6s and, without planning to, let himself feel proud. The feeling did not explode. It settled. It felt like learning a language all at once and also over years. In June, the 8th graders graduated in a humid gym packed with relatives fanning themselves with programs. Names were read. Cameras flashed. Gabe's name was called. He walked across the stage with a gait that had learned not to apologize. When the principal shook his hand, he didn't avert his eyes. He looked up, not into the eyes, too intense, but at the kindness at the corners of them. Later, in the parking lot full of minivans and embraces, he found Maya. "You did it," she said, and she meant the speech and the years and the being a person inside a place that does not always make room. "We did it," he corrected, and she wrinkled her nose in a yes-okay kind of way. He turned then and saw the 6th graders he'd once watched from the other side of a chasm. They looked the same as he had, brave and scared at once. He wished them the index cards he had carried, and the windows that didn't shout, and the friends who would say simple sentences that save lives. He wished them repair over revenge. He wished them teachers who read the room and parents who made cocoa when the world wasn't kind. He wished them the sense to step aside when the old script tried to trap them in roles. 2 years on, he didn't think of himself as cured of anything. He thought of himself as fluent in more lives. He understood jokes that didn't require humiliation to be funny. He understood that the world is loud, and you are allowed to find quiet, and also that sometimes you stand in the noise and say a sentence out loud because someone else can't yet. He understood that existence is not a prize awarded after you pass tests. It is the starting point. That night, in the soft breeze of evening, he sat on the front steps with Carlos and Alicia and watched fireflies write unreadable sentences above the lawn. "What does high school look like?" Alicia asked. "Not a quiz, just a postcard from the future." "Like a map with some rivers and some bridges," he said. I have better shoes now, they laughed. The neighborhood kids biked the cul-de-sac, older by 2 summers, less interested in racing, more interested in riding side by side, talking about nothing and everything. Eli called out, "Hey, Gabe." Not a test this time, just a name. Gabe lifted a hand in greeting, then lifted the other, and for a brief second it looked like he was signaling for landing planes, which he was in a way, bringing himself in, safely, to a place that had learned him, and that he had learned too. If this story touched you, even a little, please take a moment to hit the like button. It helps more people find stories like this one, stories about kindness, courage, and the quiet strength that changes lives. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Maybe you've known someone like Gabriel, or maybe you were someone like him. And if heartfelt, human stories are your kind of thing, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. More stories are on the way.